Bibles to 1 Peter chapter 2. I'm going to read the text first this morning, and then we're going to pray, and we'll get into it. But 1 Peter chapter 2, we'll start in verse 1. So put away all malice and all deceit and hypocrisy and envy and all slander. Like newborn infants, long for pure spiritual milk, that by it you may grow up to salvation, if indeed you have tasted that the Lord is good. As you come to him, a living stone rejected by men, but in the sight of God chosen and precious, you yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For it stands in Scripture, behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone, chosen and precious, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. So the honor is for you who believe, but for those who do not believe, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. They stumble because they disobey the word as they were destined to do. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, now you have received mercy. Let's pray. Father, there is a lot here in the text this morning. I am encouraged by those final words that we read, that once we were not a people, now we are. Once we had not received mercy, now we have. And God, that is to your glory and for our good. And this morning we get to look at some of that good. And I pray that you would speak, and I pray that you would challenge. And in this next season, as we look ahead, that you would use our church, you would use this community of faith to proclaim your excellencies. Now that's a lot. I ask that you would be with us. I pray that by your Holy Spirit you would speak through your word, that it would have great effect and bear much fruit in this season and the season ahead. It's in Jesus' great name. Everybody said, amen. Belonging is an essential part of what it means to be human. Everybody needs to belong, and it's more than just because I want to so much, because it's well beyond desire. You can want to belong, but this is actually a need. So it's well beyond desire. It's an intrinsic part of our makeup, how we were created, and created by a triune God, God in three, created by a triune God to belong. Case in point, in Genesis chapter 3, this devastating fall into sin, and the subsequent, wreckage, if you will, of all creation, as Paul talks about in Romans. What was the only thing in Genesis 1 and 2 that God determined was not good? That we would be alone. That we would be alone. He says it's not good for man to be alone. And the interesting thing, this is a thought I had in recent years. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Notice that it's God who determines that. It's not like God looks and sees that everything is good, and then Adam came to him and was like, I'm really lonely. And then he's like, oh, you are? Oh, okay, well, let me see what I can do about that. No, God was the one looking and going, not done. Not done. It is not good that man be alone. And if you know the story, he creates woman. And it would certainly be appropriate for us to talk about marriage this morning. We're not. I think there's much to say on the subject from Genesis 1 and 2 and how we were created and wired. So there's much that informs the topic of marriage. But I'm going to keep the altitude a little higher than that. And I want us to look more broadly because I think the principle in Genesis 1 and 2 is bigger than marriage, although it certainly relates and applies. It's about community. The need we have for one another. And again, not the desire for one another, the need we have for one another. God created us for community. Now, we talk a lot about this around here, so I don't need to belabor the point, I suppose, too much this morning. We'll get to that. But it's not just a matter of information. It's like, oh, I didn't realize that I had this need for belonging. Like, it's not something that you need to have told to you. It's so intrinsic to how you experience the world around you, you go, oh, totally true. And you're getting that from your gut, how you were wired. You know it by experience, not just because someone told you that you have a need to belong. You go, no, I know I do. I feel I do. I sense that I do deep within me. Connected to this idea of belonging is another essential part of what it means to be human. Again, it too is intrinsic and a part of our makeup and design, and you see that in Genesis 1 and 2 as well. But God created us. He created us to be on mission. He himself is a missional God, and he created us to be on mission, just as he, triune, being both one and three, created us to be in community. He also created us to be on mission. And this relates to the issue of purpose. Purpose and meaning. That we have a deep need in our gut to feel like we matter. And that our presence in any particular community matters, that we are making a difference, that what I'm doing with my days is bigger than me. You look around at culture and you watch the ads and you see on social media that oftentimes our purpose and meaning isn't much bigger than ourselves. Our purpose and meaning really is just about ourselves. And so we keep running after thing after thing after thing, trying to find the thing that meets this need, this desire to be a part of something that's actually bigger than me and bigger than a weekend. Something that'll last and last well beyond me. And again, this comes from how we were created in Genesis 1 and 2. Look at what Genesis 2 says. In verse 15, the Lord God took the man and put him in the garden to what? To work it and to keep it. Who created the garden? God created the garden, but he created man and put him in the garden to do the work. So this is an invitation by a creative God who created all things to then create us in his image and then put us to work. Put your hands to it. We were made this way, and God expands on this purpose more in Genesis 1, so I'll read that, verse 28. And God blessed them, this is man and woman, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. That's purpose, fill the earth. There's purpose, subdue it, have dominion over it. There's purpose over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, over every living thing that moves on the earth. He hits all the categories, all of it, sea, air, land, all of it. You work it. You keep it. You have dominion over all of it. Subdue it. We were created for a purpose, and our existence is then not one without meaning. Biblically, it's not one without meaning. We can certainly live without a lot of meaning, but biblically, it's not without meaning. God created us to work and together. Do you see? To work and together. And so our existence is not arbitrary. We're not just a space filler. We're not just one of many things that God created, though he did in fact create us. We don't slip to the periphery. God moves us together to center, to work it. We've talked about this a lot in recent weeks, about God establishing his kingdom. That him bringing his kingdom to earth, how he did that was he created all these things that were meant to serve for our growth and thriving and flourishing, that we would be filled and have what we need and all these things. And God was going to establish his kingdom. He chose to establish his kingdom in and through humanity. That they would subdue, they would establish his kingdom on earth, and they would work it, and they would keep it. But he's the ruler. It's his kingdom. It's not our kingdom. It's his kingdom, but he created us in his image to establish it, and he put us amidst all the things he created and said, okay, now have dominion over all of it. Establish my rule over all things, and the result would then be that people would have what they need, and that they would thrive, and that they would mature, and that they would grow, and it'd be this beautiful thing. Our sense of value and worth as a result of being created this way is closely associated and affected by both of these things, both by a sense of belonging, the together part of it, as well as the work part of it, the meaning part of it, purpose, mission. When we don't feel like we belong, we don't tend to have a sense of value and worth. When we look around and we don't have this sense that we have purpose and meaning, then again, it's directly connected to our own sense of value and worth. And this is not the topic this morning, but our enemy in that space does so much harm. He twists these truths and robs us of all dignity and all value and all worth. So it's not the topic this morning, but that ground, because we were created in this way, that ground becomes dangerous ground when an enemy's concerned. Okay, here's where we're going this morning. Because of Jesus, who he is and what he has done for us, so his own sense of belonging, his own mission, the church is the answer for both of those things. The church is God's answer to that need to belong and that need to have purpose. The church then is that answer. In Christ, the church is for us both of those things. And we're going to look and see what Peter says more closely. Now, we're in the final stretches of summer. I don't know, most of your vacationing is probably done. We head out for another camping trip tomorrow morning, so we got one more camping trip for the next couple of days. Things are winding down, and this is the time of year, which is our custom, to begin to set our eyes to the fall and to the work. And the resting and the Sabbathing, if you will, is coming to a close. It's true to form for our cultural rhythm. And we begin to look, school's going to be starting here in a month, and we start just going, okay, here we go. And we're getting back. Community groups are going to be starting again the second week of September, so those are going to get off their barbecue schedule and get back to, we feel that culturally, that rhythm as we get back to it. And these words then, I believe, are really encouraging for us as we do that and begin that process as August is upon us. And here we go, I guess, right? Peter is writing to Christians in this letter, and he's writing to Christians all throughout, particularly Asia Minor, by extension to Christians everywhere. But in this case, particularly to those in Asia Minor. It's been about 30 years or so since Jesus was crucified, and he was buried, and he rose again, and man, that was crazy. And then, not long after, the church is birthed, and people are getting saved, and it's just like, whoa, this is great. And 30 years have gone by now. There was kind of this expectation that Jesus was going to usher in this thing that they could put their hands on and then he's dead, and then they're like, what? That's not how it was supposed to go. And then he's alive again. Oh, yay, here it's good. And then he's gone. Well, that's not how it's supposed to go. And just every day, okay, I guess we wait. Maybe it's next week. He's going to come back. Maybe a couple weeks. It's been a month or two. Okay, maybe he's coming next year. 30 years. We're just trying to figure out, how is this supposed to go? Like 30 years. And historically, things were getting crazy, not unlike our day. This is not the first time Christians have had to wonder what on earth is going on when everything around seems to be going sideways. This is not the first time. We've done this many, 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 many times before. Like, Jesus, now? I mean, if it were up to me, now would be a good time. Like all that stuff you talk about, fire from heaven and mountains melting and stuff, now. Just make sure I'm out of the way first, right? Then have at it, okay? This is not the first time, guys. Is it? 30 years. Can you imagine? This is a little bit different for us because we're now a couple thousand years removed. Imagine some of you in the church were alive when, some of the adults, you were alive when Jesus was walking around. You remember going to some of his sermons. I was there that day when he was out in the boat. I was there that day. And you're waiting 30 years and you can still remember Jesus walking. Because we're long past that. There's not a one of you in here. Well, a couple of you maybe. I'm just kidding. That was rude, Patrick. Okay. There's not a one of us in here who remembers Jesus walking and teaching. We know this by faith and reading his word, and we have rich faith. It's beautiful and commendable. Yes to all of those things. It's been 2,000 years. So Peter is writing to Christians who are getting discouraged after 30. Persecution is breaking out all over the place. Things are going nuts. It's getting scary to follow Jesus. In our country, it was kind of, you look back, even in recent history, we don't even have to go back to the formation of our country. Even just recent history, to be a Christian was kind of like, yeah, of course you are. It was almost part of the cultural experience. And then that faded, and then it became just sort of like, yeah, you can be a Christian if you want. I mean, nobody's really that into it. Do what you want to do. You do you. Things are heating up. I don't know if you've noticed. They're not necessarily for you going to church, and they're not ambivalent anymore. Things are getting hostile. Persecution is increasing. Well, they were experiencing this after 30 years. We're experiencing it after a couple thousand. And he's writing to encourage them. Hope was waning. It's hard to wait. It's hard to wait. And then when waiting even gets harder, because now people are getting thrown in prison and people are getting executed, well, now it's even harder to wait. And waiting was already hard. And so he writes to encourage them. And you can see that. Actually, we're going to be in chapter 2, but look real quick at how he ends, and you can see the kind of encouraging note here. This is what he's hoping for them. So we can see how he's going to conclude. You can see what he's aiming at. Look at verse 12 of chapter 4, just a page later. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you, to test you as though something strange were happening to you. Oh my goodness. That needs to be on a Post-it on my dashboard. Because how many times have I forgotten just this? I love how he puts it. Don't be surprised when you experience these fiery trials that come upon you to test you, as if what? As if something stranger happened to you. That means then that fiery trials to test you have purpose, and it's not strange when it happens. It's like, oh, I can't believe that just happened. No. Don't respond as if something strange is happening to you. What is happening to you is normal and everyday for the believer. This isn't strange and out of place. This is the rhythm. So Peter even confronts them in this space, and part of his encouragement with it's weirdly encouraging, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you want him to say, I cannot believe these fiery trials are happening. I'm going to get to that. I'll get back to you. No, he leans in and goes, yeah, I know it. It's normal too. So let's stop acting like it's strange when it's happening. Oh. Wow, that's kind of an odd encouragement, but I still kind of like it. Because I like when things that I'm experiencing that are hard are recognized as normal. Like I'm not going crazy. Like it's not just me. That I can look around and go, oh, this is supposed to be happening? It is? Oh, well, that helps me. Doesn't take what I'm suffering away necessarily, but it helps me contextually just go, oh, that's supposed to be happening. Okay, that helps. But rejoice insofar as you share Christ's suffering. So now he's going to connect it to the sufferings of Christ, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. If you're insulted for the name of Christ, you're blessed because of the Spirit of glory and the God who rests upon you. But let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or a meddler. See, I love how he throws that in there. But some of you are calling persecution what's not persecution because you actually shouldn't murder people. So when you get arrested and thrown into jail for murdering or stealing somebody's car, that's not what we're talking about. So don't get carried away. Sometimes our fiery trials are brought upon ourselves. Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name. Okay, and look down at verse 6 of chapter 5. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you. Oh, you can feel that when things get heavy, the encouragement, the hope. Casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. Man, that's good. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. You've got an enemy. That's right, we have an enemy. I forgot about that. He's looking to devour. Oh man, that helps me just to remember that because I was feeling devoured or at least pursued. So that helps me to remember, oh, we got an enemy. That's right. Okay, that helps. Resist him firm in your faith. You can resist him? Yes, you can. Firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brothers, your brotherhood throughout the world. Oh, okay. I'm not alone. Belonging, purpose. And after you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself, look at this, restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. To him be dominion forever and ever. Amen. Whoa, like God put us on earth to establish his kingdom, to subdue it and have dominion all over. But the end of all things, I'm not the one on the throne. At the end of all things, it's Jesus on the throne, and he is the one under whom all things are in submission. And he is the one who will have ultimate dominion. And yes, the church says, take it. I'm sure there are days when you probably feel like, you know what, I wish I was the president of the United States. I'll tell you what I would do. But on a sober day, I don't want that job. And I, in this sense, God has put us in a place to have dominion and to subdue and to establish his kingdom. And we're doing it because he's called us to that purpose. And we're like, man, but when that day comes when it is Jesus who is on the throne, we are like, yes, you take it. You have it. Whew. Right? Forever and ever have it. So good. Okay, verse 1. So you can feel where he's going. You get a sense of his audience. You know where he's going. And now he's going to answer some of these things, and we're going to get some practical things. This will tee up where we're going to be going over the next several weeks. Chapter 2, verse 1. So, we'll get back to that. Whenever there's a so or a therefore, we know it has something to do with what he's already said. I'm going to hold off on that for a second. We'll just keep going, so just hang on to that. So, put away all malice and all deceit and hypocrisy and envy and all slander. Ew. Now, it is not uncommon to come across a list of sins when you're reading the New Testament. Paul does it in several cases, and we see another list here. But as you read this particular list, this one's different. Categorically, if you were to think about all the different kinds of sins, you look at this list and go, how come murder is not on there? How come there's some pretty significant sins not included in this list? So he's creating a list for a particular purpose. What do these sins here have in common? These particular sins destroy the kind of community that we were created for and called to. I'm going to say it again. These particular sins destroy the kind of community that we were created for and called to. And he's going to get to that here in a second, but he's identifying the sins that do harm to the church. One author put it this way: the sins listed here tear at the social fabric of the church. Now, oftentimes when we read the lists of sins in Scripture, our tendency is to first identify those who've committed those sins against us. And we almost read this list here and go, yeah, look what they did. You can't put away someone else's sins. Can you? No, he's not writing to those who've committed the sins against you. Who's he writing to? Me. So before you jump to, that time that somebody said this or somebody did that, I can't believe before you do that, have you done it? Where is your heart? Because that's the only thing you have any control over. It's the only thing you could put away. So this list of sins, let's do the hard heart work first before we start. This goes back to something Jesus said when he said, pay attention to the what in your own eye before you look at the speck in your brother's eye? The log. You who call out the speck and ignore the log. Oh, shoot, you mean I have to do work? Yeah, let's do the personal work in this list. Because that's all you can put away. Does that make sense? Okay. Malice. This is ill will towards others. Do you have people in your life when something bad you hear through the room or you see on Facebook, something bad happens to them and you kind of feel good about it? That you want, I'm not talking about justice. There's a biblical desire for justice. I'm talking about that sick in your gut rejoicing that you wouldn't do out loud. You go, man, I'm just really sorry to hear that. Just malice. Let's actually just stop there and pray. Because the list doesn't stop there. Deceit. That one's easy, but not hard to examine. That's the misrepresenting of the truth. And motivated by a desire to gain advantage. Hypocrisy is pretending to be something you're not. I mean, the word, the etymology of the word comes from the theater. It was a word originally used of actors who would wear masks and pretend to be what they weren't. And we use the word now differently. A hypocrite is one who's pretending to be what they're not. A friend of mine tweeted this week, and he just said, my problem with hypocrisy is the mirror. Oh my goodness. My problem with hypocrisy is the mirror. Yeah. Envy. It's a discontentedness stirred up by what others have that you don't have, whether it be position or place or things or possessions. There's any number of things we could envy. And then, of course, slander, the desire to tear down someone's reputation. And gossip is a big part of that. The point here is these sins tear at the kind of community we were created for, and we were created for belonging, and we were created in belonging. We were created for a purpose, and where these things exist, belonging is torn apart, hard to find. And certainly, if that's the case, then purpose and meaning in what we were actually here for is certainly subverted. So, what does Peter say? He says that we are to put away those things. We're to put away these things that tear at the kind of community God has called us to. It calls to mind the imagery Paul used in putting off the old self and putting on the new. Peter says, put away these things. They do incredible harm, violence even, to the church. Now back to the word so. I said we were going to get there. Look at verse 22 of chapter 1. Now, arguably, you can go back all the way to the beginning of chapter 1 and say he's referencing all of it. I can't really treat all of it because you look back at verse 13 and there's another therefore, which takes us back. So I assume all of chapter 1 is what he's referencing, but particularly for our purposes this morning, look at just the few verses prior in verse 22. We'll read just the first couple verses. Look at this. Having purified your souls by your obedience to the truth for a sincere brotherly love, love one another earnestly from a pure heart. Since you have been born again, not of perishable seed, but of imperishable, through the living, abiding work of God. Love one another. That counters that list we just walked through. Love one another. Those moments we catch ourselves in our thoughts, walking down just this malicious fantasy in our heads. Is that loving one another? When we slander, when we catch ourselves in gossip. And gossip is insidious, it's tricky. It happens in ways that feel righteous. Lots of gossip happens when people want to share prayer requests. Lots of gossip happens justified by defending ourselves. He says the answer to this list of sins and to what he's addressing is love. And I'm not surprised. We see this many places in Scripture. This love for one another has incredible relational implications when we consider belonging as a church. It has incredible missional implications when we consider purpose and meaning. Now I want to digress for just a minute. And this, for me, is primarily built out of experience. I want to just share with you a cycle, and maybe you can relate with me of what this cycle is like. Maybe you've experienced this cycle too. I'm not citing a resource here. I'm telling you how it works for me. Okay? We've already talked about this first one. We were created to belong. Okay, we need it. So what's the fear? Well, the fear is that I don't belong. Okay, so what do we do when we're afraid of not belonging? Well, we pose and we pretend and we envy and we slander and so on. Why? So that we can belong. And what happens when we pose, pretend, envy, and slander? We isolate ourselves from one another. Which does what to our need to belong? Which brings us right back to fear, and we start over. and around and around and around and around we go. It's insane, and I think that's the right word for it. I use it for me because I know the times when I feel the most crazy is when I'm locked in this cycle. There have been times, and praise God for it, where, especially recently, where I can feel my mind wandering and going through this cycle and rehearsing all the what ifs and the maybes and all the assumptions in my head that cause me to feel like I don't belong, which then has me have all these arguments in my head and these sayings. I catch myself and I go, whoa, 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 stop it. Like that needs an interrupt. It needs an interrupt because that will go for hours. How long's your commute? How long's your commute? So you consider, let's say you got a 5-10 minute commute, maybe you've got a 45-minute commute. That's 90 minutes a day, because I know what happens to me in my car. That's when I'm the most vulnerable to this cycle, when I'm alone and I'm driving and I got stuff spinning in my head and I start to be afraid and then I start to lash out and I start to go, there's nobody in the car but me. And I need to interrupt that. Stop. This is a lot of what Paul talks about on taking your thoughts captive, because they spin out sideways so fast. It doesn't even take much. I can just see something and react to it. Next thing you know, 45 minutes later, I'm like, rawr, and I'm like, what on earth? It was just a stoplight. It's insane. It's a word I'm hesitant to use, but it feels that way to me. It feels that way to me when I'm locked in it. And here Peter gets to the answer of getting off this cycle. Look at verse 2. Like newborn infants, long for the pure spiritual milk, that by it you may grow up to salvation, if indeed you have tasted that the Lord is good. So he gives a qualifier. Okay, this is for Christians. If indeed you've tasted, so then you know what I'm talking about, if in fact that is the case. So he gives that qualifier there of who he's talking to, but what does he say? Like newborn infants, long for pure spiritual milk. Now, a couple of things. There's a lot here. I just want to make a couple of points. First, when he says like newborn infants, the tendency, I think, here when reading this is to think about a new believer or an immature believer. I don't necessarily think that's what he means. Now, there's other scripture that talks about you should be on, meat and you're still on milk. And there's other passages that use this imagery about the immaturity of believers and the lack of growth and the lack of development. I don't think that's what he's talking about here, because his point of reference is the longing. So he uses an infant longing for milk, and what he's leaning on is not the immaturity per se of the infant needing development, although that can be assumed to a degree. He's saying, look at, like a baby longs for milk, long for. That's his point. So this applies to immature Christians or new Christians and old Christians. Look at old Christians. Let me say this. When you're around these things a lot, it kind of loses their oomph. You're like, I'm tired of milk. I want something else to drink. Okay, so let's all sit in this space. Whether you've been following the Lord just a couple of days or you've been committed to Christ for the last few decades or more. He's saying long for. This is the answer for what we're talking about here, is this longing for this spiritual milk. That's what he's doing. And when you long for spiritual milk, pure spiritual milk, he says, then what naturally occurs? It's interesting that when you have what you need to grow, you just grow. You don't make a decision to grow. You make a decision to have the things necessary for growth. Tracking? You don't decide to grow, but if you have the right nutrition and all the things you need, the minerals and the things, what happens? You grow. You don't put on the to-do list, make sure to grow today. Or like, I had my milk. You don't do that. If you have what you need, you grow. If you have what you need, you flourish. So the decision then is to make sure you have what you need. To have this kind of longing for the thing that you need. And it causes us to grow up to salvation. Now, an interesting aside, in Peter's view of salvation in his letter here is enduring till the end, which is fantastic when you consider it. So he's writing to Christians who are discouraged and their faith is waning because of persecution. And his reference to salvation is enduring to the end, which is a beautiful picture of eschatology, thinking of end things. That his imagery that he's using of salvation is making it, enduring all the way. And he references that a couple of different times. It's a beautiful, I don't want to call it a metaphor, because it's a literal enduring till the end, but it's a particular lens to look at salvation through. It's if you are saved, enduring to the end, it becomes this demonstration of salvation. It's beautiful. Anyway, I'll keep going. So he says to long for this pure spiritual milk. What is this? Well, this isn't complicated. The word Peter uses to interpret spiritual milk, pure spiritual milk, is derived from the Greek word logos. So it's word or reason. Logos is used in Scripture of either Jesus himself in John 1 or of Scripture. So it's this Christ-centered, Bible-centered posture that you are in pursuit of Jesus, that you are knowing him and knowing him in and through particularly his word. So he's saying this, like infants, long for milk, long for the pure, uncontaminated word of God, that by it you may grow up to maturity, ultimately to salvation, which again, the lens he's using is enduring till the end. Paul says this to Timothy when he charges him to go to Ephesus and establish elders and push against false teaching. He says this, he says, all scripture is breathed out by God and profitable. You want to talk about pure spiritual milk. All scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for, and here it is, teaching, reproof, correction, for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, equipped for every good work. This is the nutrients in that spiritual milk. Look, it's this training in righteousness, this reproof, this correction. There's the nutrients, there's the minerals. That's the stuff that helps you grow. And again, we can only put away, we have control of our own hearts, and so we say, okay, I need to work to, discipline to, put away malice and slander, catch myself, interrupt when in my head, I'm slandering, or I'm verbally to someone else gossiping and I'm slandering publicly. Like, interrupt. Put these things away, instead long for these other things. What are they? Well, reproof, correction, training in righteousness, that the man of God will have what he needs and that will grow. So Peter's saying, put away things that destroy the kind of community you were created for and called to. Get off this crazy cycle. And you do it by longing for, like infants do, the pure milk of the Word of God. Do this and you will grow. I want to get back to this idea of belonging and purpose for a second. Look at where Peter goes next. And again, this is us beginning to set our minds to a new season. Vacations are wrapping up and we're beginning to gear up. You look at Walmart, you can always tell what's coming next thanks to Walmart. Like if we didn't have Walmart, we would not know what holiday is next. And they give us, and this is the great thing about Walmart, they give us tons of time. I mean, months and months of time. Okay, sorry. It's crazy. You always tell you can feel the seasons change first in Walmart. That's where, okay. Look at this. As you come to him, well, this is great. Right after he says, long for the spiritual milk, as you come to him, in and through the word. So you're coming to Christ. As you come to him. So the assumption then at this point is that you are longing for the pure spiritual milk, and then now you are, in fact, coming to him. So as you come, here's more. As you come to him, a living stone, rejected by men, but in the sight of God, chosen and precious. Man, okay. Risk of getting off my notes here. Okay, let me say this. This is a quick little add-on. We put commas in there because we want to give a descriptor. So Peter's giving a descriptor. So he says, as you come to him, and then he's going to say, who is this him? Well, he's a living stone. And he's a living stone that's been rejected by men, but in the sight of God is chosen and precious. And then the exhortation. That's a long little qualifier. As you come to him, you know, the living stone. Oh, and by the way, that living stone was also rejected by men. Oh, but by the way, even while it's being rejected by men, by God it's what? So you feel what he just did as an aside. Just as you come to him, oh, by the way, he too knows what it's like to be persecuted. He too knows what that is like, and yet he is chosen and precious. Awesome, because look what he's going to do next. Oh, I lost my place. As you come to him, a living stone, rejected by men, but in the sight of God, chosen and precious, you yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Whoa! There is so much here. Let me make a couple of observations. He says, as you come to him, come to who? That's Jesus. Who knows exactly what it's like to be rejected by men. But then here's a beautiful truth in that rejection is that you are chosen and precious. So this is a truth he's making about Jesus. But who does he apply the truth to? You also like living stones. Do you see? So he's not just saying, that's true for Jesus. I know it's really hard for you because you're not chosen and precious, and it's really hard for you when you're rejected by men. I know that's really hard. Jesus had it really good. You guys suck it up. No. He's referencing Jesus being rejected by men, but in the sight of God being chosen and precious, so that as he turns his attention to you, to me, he says, you too like living stones. Makes a direct correlation between the two so that you would know as you were being rejected by men that you also in the sight of God are what? Chosen and precious. It is almost shocking, the comparison he makes here. But to a bunch of Christians whose faith is waning or deeply discouraged, man, as in this season, it's been a rough run the last few years. And I talk with pastors all over the place. Increasingly, it's just, articles are starting to come out, and as people are starting to have the data and are connecting with people and beginning to just talk about, man, this has got to be, for the church, one of the toughest seasons we've been in a long time. Politically, socially, it's been a rough go. And in many ways, the church across the landscape looks a little splintered and battered. Taking a lot of hits. And I would be lying to you if I said my hope had, in this season, my faith had not waned a little bit. It's been a lot. What encourages my heart is not distraction. Let's just move on to other things. Let's just think. No. What encourages my heart is that I'm chosen and precious in the sight of God, even when all heck is breaking loose every which way and things look sideways. That I'm chosen and precious like Jesus was chosen and precious. And he's going to cite Isaiah 28, which is where the chosen and precious comes from. So I'm thinking even as Peter's writing that, he's already thinking about Isaiah 28, and that's why he puts it in earlier, because he returns to it again and says this, behold, I'm laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone chosen and precious. There it is. And whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. So the honor is for you who believe, but, he's going to get back, those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. It's not as if people have said, I like this stone better, so I'm going to reject this stone because this one I think fits in my application. Has the right shape. He said, look at you do that, and the stone you rejected is not just any other stone. It's actually the stone that's bearing all the weight. The reason the structure stands is because of the cornerstone, and the rest of the stones can be erect and have their spot and hold up the structure because of the cornerstone. So the one you rejected is actually the most important one. And man, we're seeing that sort of picking and choosing. It's like, man, I like my Jesus like this. I like my Jesus like this. And we do all of this sort of rearranging and reshaping to get the cornerstone to look just how we like it. And so the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. It's the most important stone. It's the load-bearing wall. It's you can't remove this one and still have a house when you're done kind of stone. Man. It's a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, and we see that increasingly so as the church increasingly is being pitted against culture by culture, as bigots and full of hate and unloving. And if the cornerstone's the cornerstone, we don't have a house if we take it out. It's got to stay. It doesn't conform to us, we conform to it. We see here that, and this is the beautiful invitation by God, because a single stone doesn't make a house. And so we ourselves have been, that we're two chosen and precious. Now look, you're not the cornerstone. I'm not the cornerstone, right? Okay, so that's not ever going to be you, and it's not ever going to be me. That's only ever going to be Jesus. So let's make sure we got that clear. But you also like living stones. So you're like him, but we're just going to use you in the walls because you can't bear the weight of it. Jesus can bear the weight of it, but you can certainly be a part of it. See? It's a beautiful invitation. So we're chosen and precious, but we're chosen and precious not as the cornerstone. We're chosen and precious as living stones. And notice it's plural. Again, it's plural. You as living stones. He's not just saying we need one other stone. We got the cornerstone and one other. No. All of us. One stone does not make a house. Lots of stones do. Under the cornerstone, and we have a house, a beautiful house, which will proclaim the excellencies of his glorious grace, and so on. And this gets us back to this issue of community. And particularly purpose, because that house, that particular spiritual house, serves a purpose. The church is the new temple, and because of Christ, the new Passover, as the new Passover lamb offered up once for all, the scripture says, we the church, right? It says we are the temple of the Holy Spirit. We the church offer these spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God. And what are those? Well, it's our very lives. I'll just read this real quick. Romans 12, look on the screen. Paul writes this. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the what? The renewing of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Man, it works right alongside this passage in Peter really well. This is what it means to be a living stone in this spiritual house. What it means to be this priesthood, which is a shocking passage of Scripture. Look at this. Where did I leave off, though? Okay, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Look, and a stone of stumbling, a rock of offense. This is those who do not believe, stumble because they disobey the word as they were destined to do. I know that's a little scary. There's much that could be said here. Suffice it to say, the encouraging thing in this passage is that when things seem out of control, God is in control. Even when things are sideways, it still can be said, as was destined. There's some encouragement in that alone. I'll leave that there theologically. We can wrestle through that another day. Look, but to you, here's the contrast. But you, okay, that's in contrast to those who disobey, who reject the cornerstone. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. What? This is almost over the top. Royal priesthood? Priests weren't kings, were they? Priests weren't kings. And subsequently, kings weren't priests either. But the church is this new people, this new priesthood with Jesus, our great high priest, Hebrews chapter 4, and we're his priesthood and royal priesthood. You want to talk about purpose? I don't know. That we are living stones being built up in a structure with Jesus as the cornerstone, and the purpose of this structure, not a literal structure, this metaphorical structure, the kind of community God has called us to and is meant to serve us. I don't know what's a bigger purpose than this, to proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness. Church, speaking to those of you who know and love Jesus, you have been called out of darkness. Do you believe that? What have you been called out of? What have you been called to? And this spiritual house, which you are a living stone in, is meant for this purpose, to proclaim the excellencies of him who called us out of darkness. And then this, once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Man, if all of us need to belong, that's got to be one of my favorite verses. Once you were not a people plural. Once you were not, and now you are, and not just any people. You're God's people. Because I don't know of a belonging bigger than that. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. And these stones are built into a house with Jesus as the cornerstone. To what? Here's the purpose. To proclaim the excellencies of him who what? Called you out of darkness, who afforded you mercy by his own blood. Here's how I imagine what Peter is talking about in verse 4 through 10. I'm not a mason. I haven't done a lot of masonry work, but I watch these guys work, and I've watched them before, and it's amazing what with one tool they're able to do. Just knocking off edges, and So I imagine a guy at work, and quickly, and it just blows my mind to see people so gifted in their trades. But the first job is to pick the stone if you're building a wall. The first job is to pick the right one. There's a general idea of what you need. And there's an artistry to it, which is beautiful. And you pick the right one for the right spot. And then what do? Well, then you take your tool and you knock off the edges that are just a little bit, they're protruding out a little bit too much. Let's knock that edge off. Let's round this out. It's going to fit better if we put away a few things. Put away what? Malice, slander, and the like. So then it knocks off all those edges and then sets it in its place, which, by the way, is surrounded by other rocks that have been chosen. And then he moves on to the next one. And this repeats over and over and over again. Church, if you are in Christ, you have been chosen. You have been picked for a spot. And it's not just a spot that anyone can fill. Because it's like, man, I need one that looks kind of like this, and then also has that other piece coming out. Oh, that looks like chosen and precious. This is the one for this spot. But, man, it's rocking a little bit. It's not sitting well. So let's knock off a few of these edges and help to put away some of the stuff that's working against the stability of this wall. And then you do it again. That is beautifully encouraging to me. Because it doesn't have to deny, even being chosen and precious, it doesn't have to deny the edges in my heart and my life that need to be knocked off so that I sit in my spot better. In ways that relationships were broken and things were hurt and damaged because of edges I've got that I got to put away. I can do nothing about what others need to put. I can do nothing about what you need to put away. And if you're right up close to me in the wall, it's like, oh, God, give me patience, right? It's like, God, stop it, right? I can do nothing about the things that need to be put away in the stone next to me. I can only do what's in my own heart and put away what's here in my heart by God's great grace and sit in my spot better. And if we do that work under the cornerstone, God, the church is a beautiful thing. And you want to talk about a proclamation to be able to step back and look at that building and go, man, that is a piece of work. Not a piece of work, piece of work. It's glorious, actually. It proclaims the excellencies of one, you see. I am excited about this season ahead of us. I think I can say that honestly. I was thinking this week, I really am glad for where our church is and where we're going. I really am. I truly am. There is a lot that's going to be rolling out over the next few months. It's going to be one of the busier falls we have had. It's a little overwhelming, so pay attention, watch closely. Some of this stuff's going to start rolling out here pretty quick. I'm excited about it. The team's excited about it. And as we begin to roll that out, I pray and expect that you will be excited about these things too. So there's a lot. We had a meeting this week with all our community group leaders at a barbecue at my house, and we're just kind of looking at the last season and talking about the wins. We're looking ahead at the next season, trying to identify the needs, because there are many. And one of the things that was shared was that as a church, we needed to return to one of our stated values, and we need to spend some time on it. So I polled the leaders and asked, what do you guys foresee are the needs for our community moving forward? That we need to spend some time revisiting our value. It's one of our 6 stated values as a church, that community matters. We have 5 other values as well, but community matters. And it was suggested in this season that we return to that. So beginning next week, we're going to start a 6-week series entitled Come to the Table. And we're going to revisit our values. We've talked about these things before. It's been 5 years since we did it on a Sunday morning. So it's been a bit. So we're going to return to these values that we have in and around community. And over the next 6 weeks, we're going to walk it out. It will conclude on the week that our community groups kick off and begin to meet again. So there's a little strategery involved in all of that to map it out to where it will conclude the weekend that community groups kick off. And we're going to spend the next several weeks talking about the value of community, this belonging and for a purpose. It's not just belonging so we can feel good about ourselves. It's like belonging so that we can better proclaim the excellencies of him who's called us out of darkness into his marvelous light. And so in that, we'll be having several community group leaders. You'll have opportunity if you're relatively new and not in a community group. Over the next 6 weeks, you will meet near all of them as I will invite them to the stage and have some interaction and conversations. And I pray that you're able to connect. If you're not in a community group, connect into a group for this next season. For those of you who are in a group and looking forward to getting back together, that you will get back together with renewed vigor, because we have a tendency to sort of turn belonging to serve ourselves. So a lot of times our longing over time is really just about what I experience. I really like going to my community group because we have good food and it's really fun. Like, it's very natural for all of us to take belonging and turn it in. So I'm praying that as you long for your group to get back together, it's good that you have good food. By the way, let me know what group that is. But it's good that we like that experience, and I pray it is a great experience and that it does serve you. But the purpose is bigger than that. The purpose is bigger than that we would proclaim the excellencies of him who has called us out of darkness into his marvelous light. Man, I hope that encourages your heart this morning. My aim was to tee up the series that'll start next week. We're looking forward to it. Let's stand together and we're gonna close.